is a community education production brought to you by the Bar Association of Montgomery County and the Montgomery County, Maryland Bar Foundation. The program is designed to provide you with general information regarding your rights and obligations under the law. It is not intended as specific legal advice. You should discuss the facts and circumstances of any particular matter with your own attorney and obtain advice specific to your case. The participants are local attorneys who have volunteered their time to bring you this program. We hope you find it informative and beneficial.
Welcome to Law School for the Public. My name is Ann Grover, and I'm a principal of the law firm Joseph Greenwald & Lake, and I work in their family law practice. Everyone has heard about problems that have or can crop up in schools. Recent stories about hazing and bullying, sexual assault, and problems with getting special services for your child. Today, we have two guests who specialize in helping parents navigate some of the difficult situations which can arise in their child's school. I'm joined tonight by Ashley Van Cleef and Megan Benevento to educate us on how best to navigate problems in a child's school. Ashley Van Cleef is an attorney with the Law for Parents LLC, as well as a certified special educator. Ms. Van Cleef has assisted students with disabilities as a special education teacher, school and state level administrator, and school attorney. Ms. Van Cleef previously led the Resolution and Compliance Unit and served as a 504 coordinator for Montgomery County Public Schools. With that, she instituted informal, collaborative solutions to assist families and school system staff in resolving concerns through less adversarial means and focusing on win-win situations. Ms. Van Cleef has provided training in various interventions and compliance with different laws and regulations to public school personnel and administrators in Maryland. Ms. Van Cleef is a graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law and the University of Central Oklahoma. She serves on the Mental Health Management Agency Board of Directors in Frederick County, the Frederick County ACE Mentor Program Board of Directors, and previously served on the Commission on Disabilities for Frederick County. Megan Benevento is an attorney with Joseph Greenwald & Lake and practices in their civil litigation group. Ms. Benevento handles a broad range of civil rights and general litigation matters before state and federal courts throughout Maryland and the Washington, D.C. area, including child abuse, First Amendment violations, personal injury, malpractice, and class action litigation. Ms. Benevento views litigation as a powerful force that holds the government and private entities accountable for taking advantage of children and other individuals who cannot protect themselves. Ms. Benevento is a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center and the University of Oregon. At the University of Oregon, Ms. Benevento worked as a court-appointed special advocate, responsible for protecting the best interests of foster children, and helped design and implement an award-winning volunteer support program that was later adopted as the national standard for such programs. Ashley, what does an educational attorney do?
It's a great question. There's so many families that don't understand there even are educational attorneys, but I really help families navigate the school system to make sure that they're getting the supports and services that their child needs, whether that's a student that's in general education or being served through a 504 and IEP for a student with disabilities.
And Megan, you work in civil and criminal matters. How does that dovetail with Ashley's practice?
Well, sometimes when a child is injured in a school or there are complex situations where child welfare or law enforcement get involved, that's where I come in. Ashley helps families really navigate what do we do tomorrow to prevent something like this from happening again. But in terms of navigating what happened yesterday, helping families go through the investigative process or perhaps even suing a school system for injuries, that's where I come in.
And Ashley, we've seen a lot of stories in the news lately about children who are bullied in school. What is the process a parent needs to go through to really document that and raise it with the school system?
So many parents don't know, even though school systems are supposed to make parents aware, that they really need to report that. By filling out the bullying and reporting form, that institutes an investigation that the administrator needs to start. That provides the investigation, then the report back to the parents, as well as follow-up for the family to protect that student if there were any other future bullying that were to take place. So if they fill out the bullying and reporting form, it makes sure that that formal process is started, as well as documenting if there were to be other future incidents, any kind of pattern of behavior.
It's super important in the civil context as well, because if we're going to say sue someone for injury that is the culmination of a long history of bullying or abusive behavior, we need to bring to light that the parents in some capacity or the student told the school and gave them an opportunity to know that this was a reasonably foreseeable outcome. So when parents fill out the proper reporting forms, the school can't even dispute that they were on notice of what was going on, and that really helps for civil proceedings later.
And can that come into play in criminal actions as well?
Definitely, and I've seen it both ways. Sometimes I represent even juveniles who have been criminally charged for things that are going on in school, and then other times I've helped victims kind of navigate trying to hold their bully accountable. And in any event, it's super important that everything be thoroughly documented, because sometimes we can't control what law enforcement's response is to things. But if we can document in the very instance it happens in real time, that version, it's really compelling down the road, even in criminal context, in terms of consistency going forward about what happened and who knew what happened.
And Ashley, is there any sort of definition of behavior that is prohibited that may be included with bullying or differentiated from bullying that parents should keep an eye on?
Sure. So whenever we're looking at bullying, there's actually a variety of definitions that you might find on the internet. But Maryland has put forth a model bullying policy that school systems are supposed to have adopted. And so as you go to your school system and look at policies and procedures, you'll see that definition of bullying. You'll also see that bullying and reporting form to have that definition of bullying there. But anytime there's an act that causes a student to be impacted in the school setting, we're really looking at what was that act and did it cause that impact? If so, it was some institute of bullying, whether it was considered bullying, harassment, intimidation. But if someone has done something to your child that's caused an impact in their participation in school, we need to look at what that was and then what we need to do to make sure that we can right that so that it stops occurring, or that we need to change circumstances for that student because there's probably an impact from what's happened that we need to make sure we're addressing.
What types of ways have you seen schools address a bullying incident that's been reported to them?
Sure. So it can be as minor as calling the parent, letting them know that it's happened, to as extreme as moving the child to another setting or a private school because they cannot have their needs met in the public school setting anymore. So there's a huge continuum of responses. As parents look at filling out that bullying and reporting form and providing information to the school system as to what's happened and looking at that impact, it can help drive what needs to take place for that student to keep them safe from the bully, but also as steps we need to take for that student. So are they going to need some counseling? Are they having some anxiety that's coming up as even coming into the classroom because of what's happened? Do we need to give them a safe place that they can go within the school setting because they no longer feel safe in that classroom? Do we need a schedule change? Do we need to engage in some mediation between that peer that was the bully so that they can now be successful in school again? It really depends upon what happened between the two peers, what we can do to either remediate or to help that student feel safe again and address what's happened as they move forward. Some of our students are so significantly impacted that they can't come back into that school again. It's pretty traumatizing, and so we've got to deal with that trauma and make sure that we have kept them safe, but also dealt with what's happened in the past. And sometimes Megan comes in to help with that, and then sometimes we look at what do we need to do in the school to deal with what's happened to them in the past. For our students with disabilities, that may mean that we need to come to a 504 or an IEP team to talk about what further needs to take place for that student based upon a disability.
And Megan, when you're engaged by a client who's been a victim of bullying, intimidation, or harassment at school, what type of relief are they able to get against either the other student or the school itself?
It really varies depending on that individual child's circumstances. So Ashley touched on the fact that some children have special needs and they may have an individualized education plan or a 504. Those children have, I would say, more avenues to address the problem and seek relief, because 504 itself of the Rehabilitation Act has a compensatory damages provision, which means that you can actually sue for any injuries that the child received because their educational plan was not adhered to. And sometimes that happens in the bullying context, that this kid needed more one-on-one support. And if they'd had the one-on-one aid that the 504 IEP provided, then this wouldn't have happened. And so we can really look at that breach in the individualized education plan and seek additional relief. If you have a more mainstream student and they've been injured in school or suffered severe harassment, we can seek some civil remedies in terms of getting monetary relief for any out-of-pocket damages and pain and suffering that's accorded to that. It's an uphill battle for that, though, because you really have to show that it was reasonably foreseeable. This wasn't just a unpredictable moment between two students that never interacted with each other before in the school, that never had a problem before. And another thing I always try to talk to families about is your child safe today? What's going on today? And if we need to, we can even seek out things like a peace order. And the school is going to have to adhere to the terms of the peace order if there's something going on between two students that it's completely unsafe and they need to be separated. So that's a wide gamut of things that we could do, and it all just depends on what's happening in the school. Is it one bully? Is it multiple bullies? What's your child's need? Is this racially motivated bullying? Is this body shaming bullying? Is this just being mean to a kid? There's every single type of bullying has its own subsets of relief.
And Ashley, you were talking before a little bit about some of the things that the school can do to try to rectify situations. And you talked about if a child may need to go to a different school or a different school system. Well, Megan's just talking about peace orders, which would presumably preclude the other student from attending that school. How have you seen schools addressing that kind of tension between who needs to leave?
Sure. So schools, whenever you look at the type of actions that they can take based upon bullying, they can remove the bully from the school and they can put them in an alternative education program. They can put them in another school to separate the two peers. Or if that student feels so significantly impacted by what's happened in that school building, they can take the child that was bullied and put them into another school. So those are kind of extreme instances. There's a lot of supports that can be provided within the school building before we get to that something extreme, but typically by the time Megan and I see something of this nature, it's gotten pretty bad. But there are actions that they can take place within the school. I referenced earlier sort of the mediation or restorative practices that they can do to engage the children to kind of bring them back together, to work out their differences and to help them to move forward. There's counseling that can be put in place. They can change the student's schedule so that they're not in the same classes together, keep them off of the same bus. So there's plenty of actions that can take place if the children need to be separated, but once it gets so significant that the student doesn't feel safe attending school or is starting to have some panic attacks, things of that nature, we start to look at, do they need to go to a different school building, or does that bully need to go to a different school building? And administrators have a lot of leeway within what they can do within those parameters. It's certainly within the policies. They don't always take those actions, especially as you look at the data that's been reported to the state as to what actions are taken. The moving of a school is pretty extreme, and so you don't see that happen as often, where you see calls to parents, detention, working it out with the counselors being actions that schools are taking more frequently.
And in looking at the statistics, what type of age group seems to be most prevalent where there are problems with bullying, hazing, and harassment?
Yeah. So since we've been reporting data to the state, you really see the middle school as the years where we see a lot of bullying that's taking place. And so developmentally, students are looking at one another and thinking, why am I different than you? And so part of that developmental process, they also unfortunately sometimes will engage in some of the teasing and name calling. And so the data is certainly there that that's where it's most prevalent. But I'm starting to see a lot more that's happening at the younger levels, and we're seeing more at that elementary. When you look back in 2016, 2017, we had over 6,000 instances of bullying reported in the state of Maryland. And so as we think about that, there's so many that aren't even reported, or parents are just sending in an email, so they're not officially reported to the state. So that doesn't really even touch the amount of bullying that's taking place in schools, which is kind of scary as we look at the way our students are interacting with each other, as well as the long-standing impact that that can have on another student. I have students who've been so significantly impacted, it's going to affect them for the rest of their lives.
Now, Megan, when you've seen cases where a child is a victim of some sort of bullying or harassment, have you been able to see schools be able to order different classes or therapy without having either child assigned a 504 or other plan?
So with the 504 and the IEP, we have to get to a point where the bullying has caused an issue that that child didn't already have. So let's say a child developed post-traumatic stress disorder from bullying. That's when we might say they now qualify for a 504 because it's that post-traumatic stress disorder and all of the behaviors that come with it are inhibiting their ability to access the public education environment. So that's, like you said, an extreme scenario. And most children that I see that come through and ask if they could need our help, they're not to a level where they have a clinical diagnosis from the bullying, but parents are frazzled, kids are really stressed, and it is impacting their learning. And so what I like to do when we're talking about what to do to make things better moving forward is Ashley and I will sometimes play good cop, bad cop. We'll work together with clients, and she will be there on the educational end and trying to navigate a class change or what have you, or a school transfer or some sort of service. And I'm over here saying, you've been really missing the ball here, and these are the impacts, and we're looking to sue civilly. So I'm the bad cop, and the school says, oh, we don't want to make this any worse. And so we're going to try to appease them on the educational level. So we'll help the same family, but in two totally different ways.
And do you see a lot of settlements, Ashley, through mediation where the school system will accommodate things that may be from the educational end and then other things that may be in a civil end?
I do. And so thankfully, in the cases that I've worked in, the school systems have settled the cases and really given the students what they need to move forward. And we're talking about making up for a wrong, either paying for the counseling that the student has had to receive privately, some of those therapies, tutoring if they've had to be on home tutoring for a while, or paying for them to be in a different school setting to say, okay, we've had something happen on the school grounds. It's been really bad and we need to make that right. So I've seen that either through mediation or through informal settlements with the school system. Like Megan said, if a student has a 504 or an IEP, they have additional dispute resolution mechanisms that our students in general education don't have that allow us to proceed in that way. But school systems, again, when something really egregious has happened to a student, have engaged in informal type mediation with us to try to work out a solution for those students.
I'm actually seeing that pretty commonly now. I think that the general counsels in the majority of counties in our area are really receptive to an attorney reaching out and saying, listen, this is a big problem. Help me help this family so that it doesn't become a bigger problem where we have to be adversarial. And a lot of the schools are saying, maybe I won't pay for a private mediator, but let's sit down with some stakeholders and work out what we can do. And what's great when they do that is a lot of times they're bringing in, a special ed director, or they're bringing in a particular principal in that school. It's not just on a county level where you're discussing a kid with people that have no idea who that kid is. They'll bring in the people that really need to make the change into that conversation.
And Ashley, as far as social media is concerned, that's become so prevalent with kids these days. How are you seeing that impact children in schools who are being bullied?
Well, cyberbullying is probably going to be one of the biggest forms of bullying in the next couple of years. It's certainly creeping up there. It's been added into the model bullying policy for school systems to make sure that they are adopting that and monitoring that. And the difficulty becomes, how do we know whether the social media bullying or the cyberbullying was connected to what was going on in school? And so finding that nexus can be a little more difficult, but we are seeing so much more of that. I know my daughter was impacted by that whenever she was in middle and high school. It is only continuing to get worse. I have seen some really significant cases where students will say to another student via social media, "Have you killed yourself yet? When are you going to go ahead and do it?" And I don't think they would say that to that student's face, but when you're behind a screen, you feel more comfortable saying things you wouldn't say otherwise. And then the ease of sharing whatever it is that that student said back to you. Other students are sharing it with their friends. So it's not just that one-on-one bullying, it's now we have spread that to all the other peers. And so that intimidation and hazing becomes on a much larger scale because of the ease of that happening from all the different types of social media that kids are on these days. It's frightening, the things that are happening via social media with children.
And it's so hard because kids oftentimes don't tell their parents right when that's happening. And so with things like Snapchat, that message is gone. If the kid doesn't have the foresight to screenshot things or save them, or sometimes they're so embarrassed they don't want to see that on their phone anymore, they're going to delete that thread. And it's so important that the second parents realize something like that is going on, that they encourage or monitor that their kids are capturing that information, because it's so much more compelling to show the school what the text message says, or show them the video, show them the bullying. And then once you do, we're creating the notice environment where they have an imperative to make sure that this isn't bleeding into the school day or getting worse through the school.
Now, from a criminal or a civil context, if some sort of cyberbullying is going on outside of the school grounds, what redress, if any, do parents have against the schools?
That's tough, because a lot of times if the school is just a common place where the children met, but the bullying wasn't happening at school, we wind up in a difficult situation in terms of getting the school to be held responsible for that. But what we can do is say, I'm going to hold this bully accountable. I'm going to get a peace order. I'm going to file some criminal charges. And I am relying on you, school, to keep my kids safe through this, make sure that their friends aren't retaliating against them and so forth. And then that's when we can bring the school back into this accountability piece by keeping them in the loop in terms of this more exosystemic model of a bunch of different entities entering our kids' lives, and how can we collaborate together.
The great thing about that as well is if that does happen and there are certain charges that are brought against that bully in the community, the education code includes a community offense provision. And so if there is a community offense, the school system then can also take action once they are made aware by the police department. So it happens, there's charges brought, they're notified, and then that principal, let's say it's of a sexual nature, they can take even more steps that are allowable within that community offense provision to make sure the kids are not on the same bus, not in the same classes. So their protections are enabled, even if it didn't happen inside school, if community offenses are drawn up against that child.
I think that's important. A lot of parents informally do this with their kids, but there's a formal word for it. It's called safety planning. And we really encourage our clients to work with the school to create a safety plan. If this bully comes and I see them in the hallway, I as a student know to do X, Y, and Z. I, as the history teacher, know that if this student gives me a flash pass, that means that something is going on. They need to go see the counselor right now. How can we implement steps that take into account that a variety of things can happen tomorrow, and how do we make sure that everyone knows what to do in that circumstance? And then we can hold the school accountable to what is codified in the safety plan moving forward.
And Ashley, as far as reporting, is there any sort of anonymous reporting that children can utilize to make sure that it is documented, even if they don't feel comfortable giving their names?
Sure. So Maryland has put together a really great way for students to report anonymously, parents to report anonymously, the community to report anonymously. If you were outside of a school building and you saw something that was going on with a fight, you could report that. So any instance that's causing a concern around safety within our School systems can report it anonymously, and then the school system does have to look into that as well. It doesn't create the documentation trail that Megan and I like to see so that we can take further action for that specific student, but it does enable there to be an investigation and that the instance gets looked into so that it can be addressed.
And are those anonymous reports, is there any way for the school system to identify if a child says, I reported anonymously on X date, so that you could have the documentation that, say, Megan's looking for?
So if the reporter identified themselves as then being the reporter, they should be able to go back and track that.
Okay. And as far as the reports that have the children's names, does that become a part of the child's school file?
So a lot of parents are afraid of that. That is one of the reasons they may not want to file that report. They're afraid that their child will then have something bad in their record or it'll affect them later on. But it doesn't become a part of their confidential educational record. It's an educational record, so it's protected under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act as an educational record, but it's not filed and put within that student's record. The principal keeps that in their office. No one can get copies of it unless it, again, is someone who has a right to have a copy of that, and it is reported to the state in the data as far as inappropriate reports of bullying that have taken place in the school.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I would like to thank our guests, Ashley Van Cleef and Megan Benevento, for taking time to educate us on how to address various problems in schools. If you want to know more about me or either of our guests, please look us up on our respective websites, www.lawforparents.com for Ashley Van Cleef and www.jgllaw.com for Megan Benevento and me. Please let us know what you think of the show and what topics you would like to see covered in future programs by emailing us at lawschoolforthepublic@gmail.com. Please join us for future shows in our Law School for the Public series, which explore various and timely legal topics. On behalf of the Bar Association for Montgomery County, we look forward to being with you again. I'm Ann Grover. Thank you.